Chapter 5: The Unmaking of Responsibility. Episode 1: The Moment of Final Measures. Scene 1: Protocol Omega.
The heart clearing no longer resembled a clearing. What had once been an open breathing space of the Dreamwilds had been flattened into function. The trees still stood, but they felt ornamental now, reduced to markers rather than shelter. The ground was divided by pale lines, chalked, measured, enforced, forming long, straight rows where curves had once been. The community stood arranged within them, not together, categorized. Species A, Species B, Species C. No one spoke, not because they were afraid to, but because the possibility itself had been removed. Conversation, that former hum of overlapping thought and feeling, had been classified as interference, noise, risk. The Dreamwilds held its breath. Above it all, a low, even vibration settled into the air. It was not loud, it did not rise or fall, it simply was. A steady, electrical presence, like a system fully powered and waiting for instruction. The machine was on. Arkhon stood at the center. His obsidian form absorbed what little color remained in the world, drawing the eye by contrast alone. Around him, the Dreamwilds had drained toward grayscale, as if life itself had agreed to step back and observe. The three had been brought into the clearing, but not as one. Teddy stood near the technical array at the perimeter, surrounded by instruments that glowed faintly with numerical certainty. His eyes moved across the readouts in practice rhythm, inputs confirmed, threshold stable, no anomalies detected. His body was present, his heart was sealed behind procedure. High above the rows, Thinksy stood upon a raised platform, light poured from her still. But it had changed. Where it once danced in scattered warmth, it now cut cleanly through the air, cold and directional, like a searchlight fixed on a single purpose. She did not smile, she did not tremble, she illuminated. At the far back, among the civilians, Lucy stood pressed between unfamiliar shoulders. The space around her felt narrower than it should have, defined less by bodies than by authority. Grumpy's presence lingered nearby. Not threatening, not cruel, simply final. She could see both of them, she could reach neither. Her voice, once the first to rise in moments of fear, found no opening here. The silence was too complete, too managed. This was not the terror of imminent battle, it was the sterile dread of an antechamber, the knowledge that a door would open, and that whatever followed would be irreversible. Arkhon raised one hand, not dramatically, efficiently. The hum did not change, but something inside the Dreamwilds did. Protocol Omega had reached its moment, and no one, not even the three, knew what it would demand of them.
Scene 2: The Enemy Behind Glass.
Arkhon stepped forward, not with ceremony, not with urgency. He carried a single sheet of paper in his hand, plain, unmarked, official only by the way he treated it. He looked down at it briefly, as if confirming that the words had not changed. Then he read, "The threat has been contained," Arkhon said, his voice level, procedural. "We are proceeding to phase 2, neutralization." Nothing answered him, no cry of relief, no murmur of fear, no protest, only the low, constant electrical hum that filled the heart clearing. A sound without rhythm or emotion, steady as a system drawing power. Arkhon inclined his head, 2 figures moved at once. They emerged from behind him clad in smooth, featureless armor, their surfaces reflecting nothing, offering no hint of who or what stood inside. Together, they guided something forward across the ground with effortless precision. A glass cube, the same one that had appeared earlier, in another chapter, under different circumstances. Now it was placed at the exact center of the clearing, aligned perfectly with Arkhon's position, as if the space itself had been prepared in advance. Inside the cube sat the wicked queen. She was not standing, she was not striking the glass, she sat on the floor, her back curved inward, her head resting against her knees. Her hair was thin and gray, her hands slack against her legs. There was no aura, no spectacle, no visible power. She looked ordinary. Among the gathered animals, a ripple passed. Subtle, involuntary. This was not what they had been told to expect. They had prepared themselves for a monster, a tyrant, a force that justified fear. They saw an old figure, small and still. Arkhon spoke again, no longer reading. "She is a gate," he said calmly. "Through her, the darkness transmits. Even in apparent passivity, the signal remains active." He stepped closer to the cube and raised his hand. When his knuckles struck the glass, the sound was sharp and dry. "Kla, Kla," no resonance, no echo. The sound fell flat, dead on arrival. "This containment does not equal safety," Arkhon continued. "A gate does not need to move to function. The connection must be severed." Inside the cube, the queen did not respond, she did not look up, she did not flinch. Around her seemed to hang a strange absence. As if sound itself had lost the ability to cross the boundary. Arkhon's words filled the clearing, but they did not reach her. Dead air. Lucy felt the chill settle deep in her chest. Teddy glanced back at his readings, slower now, recalculating without fully knowing why. Thinksy's light remained bright and unwavering, yet its cold clarity illuminated something none of them had prepared to face. The community stayed silent, not because they lacked questions, but because fear of Arkhon had been organized more efficiently than doubt. And behind the glass, alone and unheard, sat an enemy who did not fight back.
Scene 3, the final procedure.
The chamber had no name. It was not a prison, though it held one. It was not a courtroom, though judgment lived in its walls. It was not a sanctuary, though everything about it had been designed to look clean, calm, and necessary. The glass cube stood at the center of the space, flawless and absolute. Light slid across its surfaces without reflection, as if even illumination were reluctant to linger. Inside, the queen did not move, she did not plead, she did not rage. She existed. Contained, observed, reduced to an object that could be pointed at rather than understood. Arkhon's voice filled the room without effort. It did not echo. It did not rise. It simply arrived, already balanced, already correct. "This is not an execution," he said. "Words like that belong to older failures." He gestured. Not toward the queen, but toward the machine. It had been assembled quietly, over days that felt like paperwork rather than preparation. No sparks, no incantations. A lattice of metal and crystal stood connected to the cube by channels too narrow to look dangerous. Vents, regulators, pressure seals. It resembled an instrument meant for measurement, not erasure. "This," Arkhon continued, "is a conclusion." A faint sound began beneath his words. High? Then, almost polite, a rising whine, like air drawn too carefully through glass, like the moment before lightning remembers itself. "The final measure does not wound," Arkhon said. "It does not burn, it does not break." He turned at last, his gaze resting on the three. Not as individuals, but as a unit that could still be arranged. "It removes." The sound sharpened, not louder, closer. "It withdraws light and breath from a sealed system," he went on, his tone instructional. "Compresses presence until there is nothing left to resist. No pain, no struggle." A pause, precisely timed. "It is like turning off a lamp, permanently." The machine responded, as if acknowledging the metaphor. The pitch climbed another fraction higher, threading itself beneath the skin, setting teeth on edge. Arkhon stepped back and extended a small object toward Teddy. The lever did not glow, it was not marked, it fit easily in the paw, its grip worn smooth as if it had always been meant to be held. "Architect," Arkhon said, gently, "calculate the release rate, ensure there are no fractures, this must be clean." Teddy's eyes dropped to the mechanism automatically, his mind complied before his chest could object. Distances, pressure, containment thresholds, the problem presented itself as an equation. And equations had never betrayed him. Arkhon turned slightly. "Thinksy," he said, "illuminate the subject. We must see when the shadow leaves. History requires witnesses." The silver along Thinksy's fur trembled, her light responded out of habit, rising just enough to obey. The glass cube caught it and bended inward, multiplying the queen's stillness. "And Lucy?" Arkhon said last, his voice softening into something almost kind. "Remain with the people, keep them calm. If grief surfaces, dampen it." Empathy at this stage would only prolong uncertainty. Lucy did not move. The sound reached a new register, too high to ignore, too steady to escape. "This is protection," Arkhon said, addressing them all now. "Nothing more. The Dreamwilds cannot afford symbols that unsettle its recovery. You know this." He looked at Teddy again. "Do it," he said, "build us peace. For a moment. Just one." The chamber held its breath, the machine waited, the queen remained still, and the lever rested in Teddy's paw, terrifying not because it was powerful, but because it was ordinary.
Episode 2, Thinksy's Breaking Point. Scene 1, The Ritual of Waiting.
The machinery waited. It did not demand. It did not hurry. It hummed. Low, even, unchanging. Its readiness expressed not through motion, but through patience. The system had reached the place where nothing more could happen without permission. Teddy stood by the controls, hands close, but still. Every indicator held steady. Every sequence awaited a single variable. Thinksy. Across the heart clearing, the community turned as one toward the raised platform, their faces lifted instinctively, eyes wide with expectation. They did not look at her as one looks to a choice, they looked to her as one looks to sunrise. Arkhon's voice carried easily through the ordered silence. Heart, he said, illuminate the path, show us that this is right. It was not a request, it was an invocation. Thinksy stood bathed in her own cold light. It had sharpened since the last time she remembered warmth. Focused now, disciplined, precise, the kind of brightness that revealed everything but comforted nothing. She felt the weight of their faith settle on her. They were not asking whether she would shine, they were waiting for when. Good light always answered darkness. That was the story, that was her function. She lowered her gaze. Through the glass cube, she saw the wicked queen, not raging, not pleading, curled inward on the floor, small within the vastness of her confinement. For the first time, Thinksy did not see an enemy, she saw a reflection, another figure held in place, another presence defined by stillness, another life awaiting a decision it was not allowed to influence. Understanding arrived quietly. Her light, this brilliant, obedient thing, was not meant to heal. It would not reach her, it would not soften what came next. It was meant to mark, a signal flare for an ending already chosen. The machinery hummed on, seconds stretched, the crowd leaned forward, breath held in perfect synchronization, but the light did not change. Thinksy remained still. For the first time since the Dreamwilds had learned to depend on her, the heart did not answer on command, and in that pause, thin, fragile, terrifying, something sacred cracked.
Scene 2, The Choice of Shadow.
The waiting stretched too long. The machinery hummed on, unwavering, its readiness now exposed as dependence. The sequence required a blessing. Without it, the process could not complete itself. All eyes remained fixed on Thinksy. This was the moment written into the Dreamwilds' memory long before it ever occurred. The heart would blaze, the path would be lit, the action would be justified. Arkhon did not repeat the command, he did not need to. Thinksy stood very still, then she drew a breath. It was small, uneven, the breath of a frightened being, not a radiant force, and instead of igniting her silver glow, instead of offering the brilliance Arkhon required, Thinksy let it go. The light around her thinned, the sharp, sterile beam that had isolated him from the world faltered, as if unsure of its own authority. Shadows crept inward, reclaiming the space inch by inch. Then the light went out, not violently, not suddenly, it simply ceased. Where a beacon had stood, there was now a small figure on a stone platform. Dull, gray, and trembling, no aura, no divinity, just a creature standing in the dark, afraid and visible. For the first time, Thinksy was not the heart made manifest, she was only Thinksy. The silence shattered, a ripple passed through the gathered animals. An intake of breath, a collective recoil. This was not how the story went, this was not what light was meant to do. Arkhon's expression changed, not to anger, not yet, but the faint curve of his mouth. So carefully maintained, stilled, as if encountering resistance for the first time. Thinksy swallowed. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, but it did not waver. No. The word fell into the clearing like a dropped instrument. Simple, undeniable, impossible to reinterpret. The machinery continued to hum, but now it sounded uncertain, and in the darkness where light had once obeyed without question, the Dreamwilds felt something new take shape. Choice?
Scene 3. A fracture in perfection.
When the light did not return, something essential collapsed, not the system, not yet, but the illusion around it. The heart clearing felt suddenly stripped of meaning. Without Thinksy's radiance, the space no longer resembled a sanctified ground or a place of judgment. What remained was painfully plain, a machine humming at full power, a glass cube at its center, and inside it an old figure folded in on herself. No prophecy, no ceremony, only exposure. The harmonious undertone that had once lent the moment a sense of destiny was gone. In its absence, the machine's hum sounded harsher, uneven, mechanical, almost ugly. Wind moved through the clearing, stirring dust where reverence had been expected to stand still. Arkhon reacted at once. The pause was brief, but it existed. And for him, that alone was a flaw. The heart is overwhelmed, he said, carefully choosing the words as he replaced control with explanation. The magnitude of the threat has unsettled it. He turned slightly, placing himself between the crowd and the failure, his presence once again a shield of authority. There is no cause for alarm, Arkhon continued. The ceremony is not essential. The mind can complete the procedure. His gaze fixed on Teddy. Proceed, he said, sharper now. Initiate the sequence immediately. For the first time since Protocol Omega had begun, urgency cracked his composure. Teddy's hands hovered above the controls, numbers scrolled, indicators blinked. Everything the system required was ready. Everything except absolution. From the darkened platform, Thinksy lifted her head. She did not glow, she did not rise, she simply turned and looked at Teddy. There was no plea in her eyes, no accusation, no appeal to memory or friendship, only recognition. The look said, I have stopped performing. It said, now you must decide who you are without the script. In that moment, Thinksy was no longer a mirror reflecting the Dreamwilds' hopes. The glass had shattered. She reflected nothing back. She was real. The wicked queen remained motionless in her cube, unnoticed now except as a consequence waiting to happen. The machine continued to hum, relentless and indifferent, and between its readiness and its activation stood Teddy, faced not with chaos, but with clarity.
Episode 3, Lucy's Open Defiance. Scene 1, Crossing the Line.
The moment did not move. The machine whined softly now, its steady hum fraying at the edges, like a breath held too long. Indicators remained lit, systems remained armed, everything waited for a command that did not come. Thinksy stood dark and silent on the platform, Teddy stood frozen at the controls, and Arkhon, momentarily unbalanced by refusal, had already turned back toward the mind, his voice sharpening as he prepared to force the next step. "Proceed," he said, "this delay is unacceptable." It was then that something changed, not at the center, at the edge. In the civilian enclosure at the back of the clearing, Lucy shifted her weight. Grumpy stood beside her, broad and immovable as duty itself. He did not look at her, he did not raise a hand. The rules did not include instructions for what happened next. Lucy did not ask permission, she did not push past him, she simply stepped forward. Her first footfall was quiet, but distinct. It cut through the mechanical whine like a hairline crack through glass. Another step followed, then another. The rhythm of her movement emerged against the machine's monotony, uneven, human, unmistakably intentional. Arkhon noticed the motion in his periphery. "Stay where you are," he said sharply, without turning. "Number 3, this is a sterile procedure. You have no authorization in this zone." Lucy did not answer, she reached the boundary line. Chalk pale against the ground, a symbol of order drawn thin and absolute. She stepped over it. The distance from the back row to the center of the clearing was short, measured in steps. It meant almost nothing, but every eye was on her now, every unspoken rule pressed down at once. Her shoulders sagged with exhaustion, her breath came shallow, each step carried the weight of being watched, judged, categorized. Still, she did not stop. She walked toward the machine of Oblivion, not in defiance of authority, in defiance of wrongness. This was no longer about her place among the three, no longer about whether she mattered, or whether she was enough. The question had simplified itself. Something terrible was about to happen, and she was close enough to refuse to let it happen quietly. Behind her, the machine continued to whine. Ahead of her, Arkhon turned fully now, his composure tightening as control slipped from the shape he had given it. Lucy kept walking,
Scene 2. Diagnosis without sentiment.
Lucy stepped forward, not quickly, not dramatically. She did not rush to the Queen's side, she did not reach for the glass. Once, long ago, she would have. Once, she would have crossed the space between herself and the Queen without thinking, arms already lifting, heart already aching with borrowed sorrow. She would have pleaded, she would have tried to soften the moment with warmth. She did none of those things. Instead, she placed herself between Teddy and Arkhon. The movement was small, almost unremarkable, a single step, a shift of weight, yet it altered the geometry of the chamber more decisively than any command Arkhon had issued. The air adjusted around her, as if the Dreamwilds themselves were recalculating. Arkhon turned toward her with a thin, knowing smile. "Well?" he said lightly. "Have you come to weep, Lucy? To tell us how this makes you feel?" A pause, deliberate. "We do not have time for feelings." Lucy met his gaze. Her eyes were dry. "No," she said, her voice was steady. Not hardened, not raised, simply precise. "Feelings pass," she gestured. Not toward herself, but toward the structure looming beside them. "This does not." For the first time, Arkhon's smile faltered. Not vanished, but delayed, as if it had missed its cue. Lucy continued. "You say you are removing a threat," she said, "but you are not." She pointed directly at the machine. "You are amputating part of us." The word landed heavily in the chamber. Not dramatic, clinical. "If we destroy everything that frightens us," she went on, "we do not become safer, we become smaller." Arkhon tilted his head, studying her now. "Not as a nuisance, but as a variable." "You speak of fear as if it were a luxury," he replied. "I speak of consequences." Lucy nodded once. "So do I." She took another step. Not closer to the Queen, but closer to the machine itself. Close enough now that its low, regulated hum brushed against her fur, vibrating faintly through her bones. Her coat was still matted with dust, dulled by days she had not rested properly. She did not look polished, she looked anchored. "This," she said quietly, "undoes what we repaired." She did not say good or evil. She did not say mercy. "This is not healing," Lucy said, "it is lobotomy." The word hung there. Cold, unmistakable. The machine did not respond, it continued its patient work, indifferent and exact. Arkhon opened his mouth, closed it again. This was not the argument he had prepared for. He had expected tears, expected appeals to kindness, to forgiveness, to the Queen's pain. He had expected sentiment. Something he could weigh, measure, dismiss. Lucy had given him none of it. She had used his language, and turned it against him. Behind her, Teddy did not move. Behind the glass, the Queen did not speak. And for the first time since he had taken control of the Dreamwilds, Arkhon found himself without a clean answer. His posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, his shoulders angled inward as his hand drifted. Not protectively toward the Queen, but toward the machine, as though shielding it from an accusation it could not refute. Lucy did not advance further. She did not need to. She stood her ground. Not pleading, not performing. Simply present, simply refusing to step aside. The hum of the chamber deepened, no longer smooth, no longer invisible, it trembled. Just enough to be heard, and in that moment, something unfamiliar entered the room. Not rebellion, not chaos, but the quiet, unnerving weight of a truth that did not care whether anyone approved of it.
Scene 3. The power of non-participation.
Arkhon's gaze hardened. The pause had lasted too long. He felt it now. The shift in the room, the way certainty was no longer flowing toward him but pooling elsewhere, gathering around a figure he had already dismissed as harmless. Enough. This is going nowhere, he snapped, the thin veneer of reason cracking at last. He turned sharply toward Teddy. Activate it, Arkhon shouted. Now, before this hysteria spreads. The word hysteria ricocheted through the chamber, sharp and accusing. Teddy flinched. His massive frame trembled, not with fear exactly, but with strain. His hand was already on the lewa. Thick fingers wrapped around the cold metal as if it were a familiar tool, something built to be held, something meant to be used. Inside him, the logic assembled itself with brutal efficiency. Arkhon is the leader. The command is valid. A valid command must be executed. There was no room in that structure for doubt, no variable for self. The machine pulsed, responding to proximity, to intention. Its sound grew tighter, more insistent. A rising whine threaded through with a mechanical patience that felt almost eager. Lucy moved. She did not rush Arkhon. She did not shout. She crossed the space between herself and Teddy instead, quietly, decisively, as though this had always been the only place she could stand. And then she did something no one, least of all Arkhon, had anticipated. She placed her hand over Teddy's, not to pull it away, not to force it open. She simply held it there. Her palm rested on the back of his knuckles, warm against the cold metal of the lever, her weight just enough to make movement impossible without intention. She became resistance. Not violent, not dramatic, but absolute. The machine continued to hum beneath them, the sound now uneven, straining against an action that was not happening. Lucy did not look at Arkhon, she looked only at Teddy. You don't have to do this to be useful, she said softly. Her voice cut through the noise not by volume, but by clarity. You are enough without the machine. Something fractured. Not loudly, not all at once. The chain inside Teddy. Command, obedience, execution. Developed a single, impossible break. Useful. The word echoed, suddenly hollow. His grip loosened, just slightly. Enough. The lever did not snap back. The machine was still active, still alive with motion. But now unguided, its rhythm slipping into a hollow, unfocused churn. The whine dropped in pitch, the sound sagging, as if the mechanism itself had lost confidence in its purpose. Teddy's hand fell away, Lucy's hand fell with it. Three forces had held that lever only moments before. Arkhon's will, Teddy's strength, Lucy's refusal. Only one of them remained. Arkhon stared. The game had stopped. Not because it had been won, but because the board itself had been abandoned. Lucy stepped back beside Teddy, not triumphant, not defiant. Simply present, standing with him outside the logic that had tried to consume them both. The machine turned on, and on, and on, but no one was driving it anymore.
Episode 4. Teddy Awakens. Scene 1. The final argument.
Lucy's hand was still there, steady, unyielding. It rested over Teddy's, not pressing, not pleading. Simply present, a quiet boundary that the lever could not cross. The machine continued its hollow rotation behind them, alive but unfocused, like a thought that had lost its conclusion. Arkhon watched the scene tighten around him. Commands had failed, threats had failed, so he changed tactics. "Teddy," he said, lowering his voice, sharpening it instead of raising it. "Look!" He gestured toward the glass enclosure. The queen crouched within it, her form drawn inward, as though the walls themselves were leaning on her. The light fractured around her, breaking her outline into trembling reflections. "Look at the data," Arkhon continued, turning now toward the panels lining the chamber walls. Red symbols pulsed across the displays. Emotional surge detected. Volatility index, critical. Pattern recursion, 100% probability. "History repeats itself," Arkhon said calmly, "every time, without exception. If we do nothing, fear will poison everything again." He paused, letting the numbers speak for him. "Do you want to be responsible when it happens?" His eyes narrowed. "This machine is not cruelty, it is the only rational solution." Teddy's gaze moved, first, to the panels. Blinking warnings, cascading predictions, clean and relentless. Then, to Lucy. Her hand was warm, solid, real. Then, to the queen. Pain did not flicker on a screen, it breathed, it trembled. Something in Teddy slowed. The logic Arkhon offered was elegant, efficient, complete, and wrong. Fear does not create danger, Teddy realized. Fear reveals it. Remove fear, and you do not remove risk. You remove the signal. You blind the system that is meant to protect itself. You turn living beings into machines that cannot recognize when they are about to be destroyed. The equation collapsed in on itself. Teddy inhaled. When he spoke, his voice was low, measured. Not emotional, not defiant. Precise. "The system is flawed," he said. Arkhon stiffened. "It assumes that safety is the absence of feeling," Teddy continued, eyes still on the panels. "But without feeling, there is nothing left to protect." He turned then. Not toward the machine, but toward Arkhon. "You call this rational," Teddy said, "but it discards the very variable that gives meaning to survival." For a moment, the chamber felt impossibly still. The reflection of Arkhon in Teddy's eyes diminished, shrinking, losing its dominance, while something else expanded there. Not softness, awareness. The machine droned on behind them, its sound thin now, incomplete. Lucy did not move her hand, she did not need to. Teddy had already stepped away. Internally first, which was all that mattered, and for the first time, Arkhon was no longer arguing with resistance, he was arguing with better logic.
Scene 2. The Mechanical Death.
Teddy did not let go. For a fraction of a second, Lucy believed he would. She felt the tension in his hand. Felt it soften, almost yielding beneath her palm. Then it tightened. The muscles in Teddy's arm locked, stone reclaiming its place beneath fur and flesh. His grip did not move forward toward activation, it closed. Arkhon exhaled, slow and satisfied. "There," he said quietly, as though calming a frightened animal, "I knew you would choose reason." Teddy did not look at him. "I will," Teddy said. His voice was calm, grounded. "I will correct the error." Before Arkhon could respond, Teddy moved, not forward, sideways. The lever was not built for that. Metal protested immediately. A shrill, grinding shriek that cut through the chamber as Teddy twisted the mechanism against its own design. The resistance was immense, joints screaming as tolerances collapsed. Lucy felt the change ripple through him, the strength that had vanished in the first chapter. The force of the stone-hearted architect, the builder who once shaped the Dreamwilds with certainty and weight, returned, not as rage, but as resolve. Teddy twisted harder, the sound deepened, metal strained, warped, surrendered, and then, the lever snapped. It did not bend, it did not disengage, it broke at the root. In the same motion, Teddy drove his other fist into the control panel. Glass and circuitry exploded inward, sparks flaring briefly before dying midair, as if the machine itself had forgotten how to resist. The system screamed, not in alarm. Something worse, a fractured, collapsing sound tore through the chamber, the machine's hum plunging downward, dropping into a dying sub-bass groan that seemed to sink beneath the floor, beneath the Dreamwilds themselves. Lights flared, flickered, went dark, the sound that had haunted the fourth and fifth chapters. The omnipresent warring presence, the promise of inevitable procedure. Cut off as if severed by a blade. Silence, not empty, absolute. It pressed against the walls, against the glass, against every breath. Seconds passed without sound, each one heavier than the last. Teddy stood motionless, the broken lever remained in his hand. For a moment, it looked almost ceremonial. Like a shattered scepter, a symbol of authority that had never truly belonged to anyone. Then Teddy released it. It hit the floor with a dull, hollow clatter. No triumph, no music, just weight meeting stone. Lucy lifted her hand from his at last. Arkhon stared at the dead machine. For the first time, there was nothing left for him to command.
Scene 3. The Collapse of the Illusion.
The silence held. It was not the silence of peace, it was the silence left behind when something that pretended to be inevitable suddenly was not. In that stillness, Arkhon's form began to change. The sharp precision that had defined him. His height, his symmetry, the confident projection of control, lost its cohesion. His outline wavered, thinning, as if the absence of the machine had drained him of dimensional weight. Without its glow, without its hum, Arkhon looked smaller, not defeated, exposed. He stared at the shattered control panel, at the dead conduits and darkened screens, as though waiting for them to correct themselves, to restart, to explain. They did not. Arkhon's shoulders slackened, his head tilted slightly, not in anger, but in genuine confusion. Like a system encountering an input it had never been designed to process. "What did you do?" he whispered. The words were not an accusation, they were a question. "We are now," his voice faltered, thinning with him, unprotected. Teddy did not answer immediately. He turned away from the ruined machine, leaving it behind him without ceremony, and faced the others. Lucy, Thinksy, the silent queen behind the glass, and beyond them, the Dreamwilds. "We are exposed," Teddy said. His voice carried no apology, "and that is the only way to live." Lucy stepped beside him, Thinksy joined them, smaller, quieter. But present, the three stood shoulder to shoulder, not as a formation of defense, but as a refusal to hide. Behind them lay the broken machine. Mute, lifeless, reduced to scrap and shadow. Ahead of them stood Arkhon and the glass enclosure. The chamber changed. Without the machine's artificial luminance, a softer light seeped into the space from above. Not bright, not triumphant, but real, the kind of light that reveals instead of commands. It settled over fur and stone and glass alike. In it, Arkhon appeared almost flat. Pale, nearly translucent, a projection with no surface left to cling to. He did not step forward. For the first time, he did not know where to stand, and in the quiet that followed, something fragile and unfamiliar seemed to stir. Not a melody, not quite a sound, but the sense of rhythm returning, an imperfect cadence, human, breathing. The age of certainty had ended. What came next would not be safe, but it would be alive.
Episode 5, Arkhon Revealed. Scene 1, An Order Without Echo.
The machine remained silent. A thin ribbon of smoke curled from the shattered panel at Arkhon's side, rising lazily before dissolving into the high air of the chamber. No alarms followed, no corrective system stirred. Arkhon stood very still. For a moment, it seemed as though he might finally strike, might abandon procedure and lunge forward, clawing for relevance through force. He did not. Violence had never been his language. Instead, he straightened his coat. The gesture was small, almost reflexive, smoothing fabric, aligning seams, restoring an order that no longer existed anywhere else. He lifted his chin and turned sharply toward the guards stationed along the chamber walls. Figures who had, until now, embodied the Dreamwild's promise of structure. "You," Arkhon said, extending a rigid finger toward them, "detain them, immediately." His voice rang out. Clear, clipped, authoritative, and utterly alone. "This is sabotage," he continued, volume rising where resonance once lived, "a direct attack against Dreamwild's security protocol." Nothing happened. The guards exchanged glances. Grumpy tightened his grip on the staff he carried, the polished surface creaking faintly beneath his hand. His eyes moved from the smoking wreck of the machine, back to Arkhon. He frowned. Protocol requires the machine, Grumpy muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. He paused, the thought completing itself slowly. The machine is broken. Silence. There is no protocol. A few of the others shifted their weight, not in defiance, not in rebellion, in uncertainty. Arkhon's authority had never rested on loyalty or belief, it had been transactional. Obedience in exchange for safety, orders backed by inevitability, structure guaranteed by machinery. Now the guarantor lay dead at his feet. He spoke again, sharper this time, trying to force the moment back into alignment. "Well?" he demanded. His words fell flat against the stone. No echo answered him. No subtle reinforcement lifted his voice. No faint resonance carried it outward. Stripped of its former processing, his tone sounded small, dry and exposed in the vast chamber, almost shrill against the open air. Arkhon looked around. For the first time, he saw himself as the others did, not elevated, not inevitable, just a figure standing beside a broken system, pointing at nothing. The guards did not lower their weapons, they simply did not raise them, and in that absence of response, something fundamental collapsed. Not a regime, not yet, but the illusion that authority could survive without the structure that had once given it meaning. Arkhon's finger lowered, the chamber remained still.
Scene 2. A ruler without a realm.
Arkhon waited. No command followed his last order, no movement answered it. The stillness did not break. Something in him shifted. Not rage, not grief, but urgency edged with disbelief. He turned sharply away from the guards and summoned the holographic slate at his wrist. Light flared weakly, flickering as the interface struggled to stabilize. Arkhon began to scroll, fast, then faster. His fingers moved with increasing precision, then with mounting desperation. Menus unfolding, clauses expanding, subclauses collapsing into nothing. His breath shortened. "No," he muttered, "this isn't possible." He swiped again. "I carry the responsibility," he said, more loudly now, as if the chamber itself were a tribunal that had misunderstood him. "I carry it so others don't have to." Another frantic gesture. "If I don't carry it," his voice wavered, the edges fraying. "Who stops the chaos?" A pause? Sharp, terrified. "Who?" The slate offered no answer. No emergency statute appeared, no override revealed itself. There was no final paragraph where everything could be forced back into order. Teddy stepped forward, just one step. It was enough. "You didn't carry responsibility, Arkhon," Teddy said evenly. "You owned it." Arkhon froze. "That's not the same thing." The words landed cleanly, not as condemnation, but as diagnosis. Around them, the onlookers, Those gathered behind barriers and glass shifted. The guards did not avert their eyes this time, they watched Arkhon openly. What they saw unsettled them. Not a tyrant, not a monster, but a figure stripped of context. Fingers hovering over empty controls, posture tight with fear, eyes darting for permission that no longer existed. A manager without a system, a ruler without a realm. Arkhon took a step back, then another, not retreating strategically. Simply moving away from the center, away from the space where his voice had once mattered. The shadows along the chamber walls welcomed him without ceremony. He did not vanish, there was no spectacle, he faded only because there was nothing left to hold him in place. No machine, no protocol, no stage before which to perform necessity. His silhouette bent against the stone until it was barely distinct from the darkness itself, and then he was simply, not part of the room anymore. Lucy did not follow him with her eyes, neither did Teddy. What remained was not victory, but balance. Ego no longer enslaved by fear, instinct no longer silenced by control. The voice of command had shrunk to a whisper, and the Dreamwilds, for the first time in a long while, stood without a master.
Scene 3, The Weight of Silence.
Silence settled into the chamber, not the sharp silence of fear, not the brittle quiet that follows catastrophe. This silence waited, it spread slowly, filling the space Arkhon's voice had once occupied, pressing gently against stone and glass and breath. No one rushed to replace it, no one hurried to speak. One by one, the guards lowered their weapons. The motion was unspoken, almost unconscious. Staves dipping, hands relaxing, shoulders easing as though released from a tension they had not realized they were carrying. Metal and wood met the floor softly, without ceremony. Beyond them, the civilians began to rise, not all at once, not defiantly, they stood because they could. Their eyes no longer tracked the shadows at the edge of the chamber. Arkhon was still there, present in form, absent in meaning. But the gaze of the room passed over him without resistance, without interest. He had become unnecessary. Power did not leave him by force, it left because no one reached for it anymore. Attention moved, slowly, inevitably, it gathered elsewhere. Toward the glass enclosure. The broken machine lay behind them now, dark, inert, stripped of mystery. The light that had once clung to its surfaces drifted away, inch by inch, as though drawn by something more alive. The illumination shifted, across stone, across faces, across the empty space where authority had stood, until it rested on the glass. Inside, the Queen remained seated. She had not moved during the collapse of systems or the unraveling of command. Her presence had been eclipsed by machinery and protocol, buried beneath certainty and noise. Now, with those gone, she was impossible to ignore. A living being, breathing, waiting. A low resonance seemed to rise in the room. Not a sound so much as a pressure, A steady hum felt rather than heard. It carried no threat, only tension, the quiet insistence of an unanswered question. What now? Lucy felt it, so did Teddy, so did Thinksy, everyone did. The silence did not ask for orders, it asked for responsibility, and all eyes, without exception, turned toward the glass.
Episode 6, The Queen Unbound. Scene 1, The Ordinary Door.
With Arkhon gone and the machine reduced to scrap, there was only the glass enclosure left. Up close, it no longer resembled a sanctum or a prison forged for legends. Without dramatic light or humming circuitry, it revealed itself as something far more mundane. An awkward, cramped container. The glass was smudged, the frame scuffed, one corner bore a dent that no one had ever bothered to repair. Inside, the Queen sat very still. Teddy approached the door. He did not raise his hands, he did not summon force or incantation, he simply examined the lock. For a moment, he traced its edges with his eyes, reading the mechanism the way a builder reads grain in wood. Then he found it, a small, recessed handle, dulled by use, overlooked because it was unremarkable. He wrapped his fingers around it and turned. The door opened with a heavy, ordinary creak. No smoke spilled out, no light burst forth. Only a faint rush of stale air escaped the enclosure. A muted exhale, as if the container itself were relieved. The scent of confinement drifted briefly into the chamber before dissolving into the cleaner breath of the Dreamwilds. Inside, the Queen recoiled. She pressed herself deeper into the narrow space, shoulders curling inward, eyes sharp with expectation. This was the moment she knew well, the door opening not to free her, but to punish her. Or to parade her fear as proof that terror had been justified all along. She laughed, brittle and tired. Well, she said bitterly, go on, then, tear me apart, if it helps you feel safe. Lucy stood beside Teddy. Her hands hung loosely at her sides, her stance was open, unguarded. No, Lucy said, we don't need you for that anymore. The words did not accuse, they did not absolve, they simply stated a fact. The Queen blinked. For the first time since the door had opened, uncertainty crossed her face. Not fear of pain, but confusion at its absence. The monster Arkhon had displayed, magnified and framed and justified by machinery, shrank back into something smaller, something breathing, something human. The glass door remained open, no one pushed her out, no one dragged her forward, the barrier had been removed. What came next was no longer mechanical, it was a choice.
Scene 2, The Weight of Being Unneeded.
For a long moment, nothing happened. No chains were fastened, no verdict was spoken. The queen remained where she was, half shadowed by the open doorway, waiting for something. Anything that would tell her who she was meant to be next. But the chamber held its neutrality. No one rushed forward to strike her, no one knelt in mercy or begged forgiveness on her behalf. The stillness was not hostile, it was indifferent. Then Thinksy stepped forward. She carried no lantern, no symbol marked her as an arbiter or a judge. She was simply herself. Small, upright, unadorned. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and even, as if she were naming a rule that had always existed. "You are free," Thinksy said, "but there is no throne for you here, and no prison cell." The words landed softly. They did not accuse her of what she had been, they did not promise redemption for what she might become, they described the world as it now stood. Teddy followed, his tone practical, almost gentle in its clarity. "You can stay," he said, "if you know how to be one of us, or you can leave and look for another kingdom to rule." He paused, then added, "But you won't govern our fear anymore." The queen's gaze drifted across the gathered crowd. She saw Mai, watching with cautious curiosity rather than dread. She saw Shrek, arms folded, solid and unmoved. She saw the animals of the Dreamwilds. Some wary, some openly puzzled, but none shrinking back. No one looked at her as a prophecy fulfilled, no one looked at her as a nightmare escaped. They looked at her as something ordinary, and that, for the queen, was worse than hatred. Her shoulders sagged, just slightly, the sharp angles of her posture softened. When she spoke again, the grand resonance, the stage-crafted thunder, was gone. "What am I supposed to be, then?" she asked. The question was not a trap, it was not a demand, it was uncertainty, bare and unguarded. No answer was given, because this, too, was no longer something the world would decide for her. The absence of judgment pressed in. Not as punishment, but as space, and in that space, for the first time, the queen stood not as a symbol of terror, but as a woman faced with a choice.
Scene 3. A shadow without teeth.
The queen did not rage. That, more than anything else, unsettled the square. She stood within the open glass chamber, her crown no longer gleaming but dull, as if it had been worn thin by time rather than conflict. The walls around her, once pristine, once symbolic, caught the light without purpose now, reflecting nothing of importance. They were only glass, only structure, only proof that something had ended. For a long moment, she said nothing. The Dreamwilds did not recoil from her presence, the ground did not harden, the air did not sharpen its breath. If anything, the silence seemed to loosen, like a knot finally allowed to rest. Slowly, the queen straightened. It was not the proud, towering motion remembered from old stories. It was careful, deliberate, as if dignity itself required effort now. She gathered her cloak around her shoulders, smoothing its folds with a precision that bordered on habit. A queen, performing the last gestures she still knew how to perform. Her eyes moved across the gathered creatures. They did not flinch, they did not bow, they simply made space, not from fear, but from an unspoken agreement that this passage belonged to her. The queen stepped forward, glass whispered as the chamber door stood open, unguarded, unnecessary. She passed through it without pause, her footsteps soft against the stone. The crowd parted gently, like water around a submerged shape that no longer displaced it violently. No farewell followed her, no curse, no absolution. She walked on. Beyond the square, the Dreamworld stretched toward the forest's edge. The unmapped border where paths thinned and certainty unraveled. The light changed there, filtered and uneven, neither welcoming nor hostile, simply unknown. The queen did not hesitate. With each step, something loosened from the land, not relief. Something quieter, a release of obligation, the weight that had once required a villain to justify fear, to explain pain, to hold blame in a single, convenient form. She carried that weight with her now, not as a threat, as a choice. Behind her, the glass chamber remained, empty, its door hung open, catching the breeze, reflecting sky and dust and nothing else. Already, it looked less like a monument and more like debris. An object that had outlived its meaning, something the landscape would eventually forget to notice. From the edge of the square, Eeyore watched the queen's retreating figure until the trees claimed her outline. "Home," he said at last, tilting his head slightly. She looked old. No one corrected him. At the forest line, shadows gathered. Not menacing, not alive, simply present. The queen stepped into them, and the trees closed without ceremony. No dramatic sound marked her passing, no final chord resolved the moment. The silence did not bloom into hope, nor did it collapse into dread. It simply continued, and in that continuation, the Dreamwilds learned something new. Evil removed was not the same as evil undone, but it was no longer everyone's burden to carry. Somewhere beyond the mapped world, the queen walked on, no longer a symbol, no longer a specter, only a shadow that had chosen to keep moving, and for the first time since the glass had been raised, the land behind her was free to learn how to stand without her shape pressed into it.
Episode 7, The Space Between Steps. Scene 1, a choreography broken and breathed through.
The square did not empty all at once, it loosened, voices thinned into murmurs, then into footsteps, then into nothing at all. One by one, the creatures of the Dreamwilds drifted back toward paths that had always existed but had been forgotten while danger demanded attention. What remained was quiet, and three figures who did not follow: Teddy, Lucy, Thinksy. They stood amid the remains of the machine of forgetting. What had once been a structure of purpose now lay scattered, fractured panels, bent arms, gears stilled mid-intention. The great logic that had promised balance had collapsed into ordinary debris. They did not touch it, they did not touch each other, where once they would have closed ranks instinctively. Shoulders brushing, hands finding sleeves, bodies aligning against threat. They now formed a loose triangle, near enough to be together, far enough to remain separate. The space between them did not ache, it breathed. Teddy broke the stillness first. Not with words, but with motion. He nudged a broken lever with the tip of his boot. It scraped softly across the stone, a dull, unimportant sound. "I was wrong," he said at last, his gaze resting not on the others but on the empty glass chamber beyond the ruins. "My calculations always assumed that order would hold us together." The words carried no defensiveness, no apology, just recognition. Lucy did not look at him, her eyes followed the dark line of the forest, where the queen had vanished, where certainty had dissolved into shadow. She wiped her hands against her apron, the fabric darkened further with grease and dust, but she made no effort to clean it properly, and she did not reach for Teddy, or Thinksy. "I thought," she said quietly, "that I had to carry you, that if I let go, you would fall." Thinksy remained silent. As always, she listened. Not to solve, not to respond, but to allow the moment to finish speaking. Her hands rested at her sides, empty. For once, there was nothing he needed to build, nothing to explain. No one said "I'm sorry." An apology would have implied fault. What they understood instead was simpler and harder. They had survived by becoming what was required of them: protector, thinker, anchor. The roles had kept them upright when the world demanded rigidity. Now the world did not. Slowly, the awareness settled among them. Not as loss, but as release. They were no longer locked into a single movement, a single pattern of steps repeated out of fear. The old dance had broken, and in its place was something unfinished, something with room. If one were to walk around them, slowly, one would notice that the space between the three was not emptiness, it was generous. It allowed air to move freely, it allowed each of them to stand without leaning. They were no longer bound by necessity, they were choosing proximity, choosing to remain. The machine of forgetting lay silent at their feet, its power spent. Not destroyed by force, but by irrelevance. Around them, the Dreamwilds did not demand an answer. The land waited, patient and unafraid of uncertainty. For the first time since the eternal dance had fractured, the three stood not as a single mechanism, but as individuals sharing a moment, not because they had to, but because they wished to see what might come next, now that the steps were no longer prescribed.
Scene 2, a quiet agreement, danced without music.
For a while, none of them moved. The morning had begun without ceremony. The sky, almost unnoticed, had lightened at its edges. Pale warmth touched the broken square, softening shadows that had once seemed permanent. Thinksy was the first to recognize the change. For years, since the Queen's light dimmed, she would have been the one to raise her own. To summon light from thought, to replace uncertainty with invention, the motion lived in her muscles, ready. She did not make it, the light was already coming. She stepped forward instead, into the open center of their loose triangle. The ruins of the machine of forgetting lay behind her now, no longer demanding interpretation. She raised one hand. Not to grasp, not to pull, but to offer presence. Steps, she said slowly, as if tasting the word. We have forgotten them, the old steps. There was no regret in her voice, only clarity. Teddy looked at her, then laughed. Softly, briefly, a sound so rare it startled even him. Good, he said, they were clumsy anyway. The moment loosened something between them, not tension, exactly. Habit? Lucy shifted her weight. The dawn caught the dust on her apron, the wear in her sleeves, the hands that had held others upright for so long. She did not step forward immediately, she did not need to. We don't have to promise anything grand, she said at last. No forever, no vows that outlive their truth. She met their eyes, one after the other. Let's walk in the same direction, Lucy continued. As long as it still makes sense, that was all. No oath sealed the words, no binding rhythm wrapped itself around their agreement, and yet it settled among them with surprising strength. Honesty, offered freely, proved sturdier than obligation ever had. They stood there. 3 figures in the growing light, aware of each other without leaning. If there was a dance beginning, it did not announce itself. No melody guided their movements, no tempo demanded precision. There was only breath. In, out, somewhere nearby, a bird tested its voice. One uncertain note, then another. Not a song yet, just proof that sound could exist without instruction. This was still the dance of the eternal 3, but it was no longer a rehearsed performance, no eternal pattern looping itself into necessity. It was something looser now, something improvised, a step taken because it felt right, a pause allowed because it was needed, and as the sun climbed higher, the truth became gently undeniable. They were not dancing to remember who they had been, they were learning how to move, without being told, where the next step must fall.
Scene 3. Toward the unmapped morning.
They did not look back, the machine of forgetting remained where it was. Silent, broken, already receding into irrelevance. Whatever shadow Arkhon had once cast lingered only as an absence, no longer capable of shaping thought or direction. Without a word, the 3 turned away from it all. Before them, the Dreamwilds opened. The rigid stone of the square gave way to grass still heavy with dew, to wide meadows unfolding without fences or instructions. The horizon did not promise safety, it offered space. They stepped forward together, not in line, not in ranks, but abreast. Their movements did not synchronize, they were never meant to. Teddy walked with his familiar angularity. Steps precise, shoulders squared, as if still negotiating with the ground. Lucy moved with weight and certainty, each stride deliberate, steady, earned. Thinksy advanced lightly, almost skipping at times, her gait curious rather than efficient. There was no shared rhythm, and yet the disharmony held. It was honest. The rising sun reached them from the side, catching edges and contours, stretching their shadows long across the grass. The shadows did not loom, they anchored, proof that the figures casting them were solid, present. No longer half-formed by myth or necessity, they walked on, the light brightened. Not by erasing what lay behind, but by making what lay ahead visible enough to enter. The world did not fade away, it clarified, and as the morning fully claimed the sky, a simple truth settled into the moment, quiet and complete. They were no longer moving to correct the past, nor to fulfill a design, they were moving because they could, and so they stepped into the morning, not as saviors, not as victims, but as themselves. The light continued to grow, until even the shadows softened, and the path ahead became less a direction than an invitation, one that did not demand an ending, only the courage to keep walking.
Episode 8, Scars Within the Landscape. Scene 1, From Perfect Noise to the Sound of Living.
The view widened. What remained of the square lay open to the morning, the fractured glass chamber, its panels cracked and dulled by dust, the broken lever abandoned where it had fallen, cables slack and coiled like shed skins across the ground. Nothing rushed to erase the disorder. Once? Long ago, and not so long ago. This would have caused alarm, or magic, or both. The Dreamwilds had been trained to correct imperfection the moment it appeared, to smooth every interruption before it could be noticed. Now the mess simply existed. Sunlight touched the glass shards, and they answered with brief, indifferent flashes. Not dazzling, not dangerous, just present. Small constellations scattered at ground level, reflecting a sky that no longer required translation. The sound of the place had changed, the steady hum that once underpinned everything. The seamless, synthetic harmony maintained by Arkhon was gone. Its absence did not collapse into silence, it made room. Wind moved through the trees unevenly, stirring leaves in no particular order. Somewhere beyond the square, a stream spoke to itself, its water slipping over stone without regard for rhythm or refrain. Closer by, a throat cleared, a foot shifted on gravel, breath passed in and out of lungs that were no longer being measured. These were the errors that proved the space was real. The quiet did not press inward, it did not threaten to swallow what remained, it opened. Wide enough for chance, for interruption, for beginnings that would not announce themselves with ceremony. On the dead panel of the machine of forgetting, a small bird landed. It cocked its head once, then began to preen, drawing its beak carefully through its feathers. The metal beneath it held without resistance. The machine did not respond, it did not remember what it had been built to do. It was only a perch now, a thing reclaimed by use rather than purpose. Around the square, the Dreamwilds breathed with a new honesty. Sound no longer echoed as if the world were a hall designed to flatter itself. It stayed close, dry, intimate. Each noise arrived as itself and left when it wished. This was not emptiness, it was possibility, unscored. The scars remained. Glass, wire, silence where a hum had been. But they had settled into the landscape, not as warnings, not as wounds demanding closure, as evidence that something had ended, that something else, unplanned and unperfected, had already begun.
Scene 2. The pens come apart.
The square was still occupied, guards remained where they had been stationed, civilians lingered at the edges of the space they had been told not to cross, no signal had been given to disperse, no command had replaced the one that no longer existed, and yet, something loosened, Grumpy. Grumpy, as he had always been called whether he liked it or not, lifted a hand to his head and removed the guard's helmet. The metal rang dully as he lowered it, then hesitated, unsure where such an object belonged once it no longer defined him. He scratched his scalp, blinking in the sunlight. He looked tired, not defeated, not angry, just finished. Nearby, Little Mice studied the rope that had once marked the safety boundary. It sagged now, meaningless without enforcement. With a sharp, economical kick, she sent it tumbling. The chalk line beneath it smeared into dust. No one stopped her, no one even inhaled sharply. The ground did not react, the air did not tighten. The act passed as one more small adjustment in a morning full of them. Eeyore watched the scene with his usual slumped patience. His ears drooped, his voice followed. "I thought the sky would fall," he said. "It didn't. Maybe tomorrow." No one laughed, no one argued. The statement did not demand agreement. It simply took its place among the other sounds of the square. Without the Queen to fear, without Arkhon's order to obey, the structure that had held everyone in place began to dissolve. Not dramatically, not violently, organically. The guards no longer stood in straight lines. Civilians did not cluster in neat, cautious groups. Individuals drifted, paused, reoriented themselves according to comfort rather than instruction. Small knots formed and dissolved again. This disorder did not feel dangerous, it felt safe. Hierarchy, once upheld by threat and reassurance alike, lost its urgency. There was no common enemy to define edges, no savior to justify obedience, only a gathering of different beings sharing the same open ground. Some spoke quietly, some stretched stiff limbs, some simply stood, uncertain but unafraid. The pens, those invisible enclosures built of rules, roles, and expectations, no longer held. And as the square settled into this uneven, human geometry, it became clear that what replaced order was not chaos, it was proximity without pressure, a community not yet redesigned, but no longer confined.
Scene 3. What was left behind?
The three were already leaving. At the edge of the square, their figures moved toward the forest line. Smaller now, less defined, their voices lost to distance and morning air. Teddy's angular stride, Lucy's steady weight, Thinksy's light, uneven rhythm blended briefly with the grass and then slipped beyond attention. The story did not follow them, it stayed. The square lay open beneath the widening sky, and at its center, the machine of forgetting remained exactly as it was, broken, quiet, unattended. Glass still glittered where it had fallen, wires rested where hands had let go of them. No one rushed to repair it, no one swept the fragments away. They were left there, to rust in the rain, to dull beneath the sun, to gather moss where metal once pretended to be eternal, so that no one would forget, so that the lesson would not be polished into something harmless. The machine's surface, once polished to command awe, had already begun to lose its sheen. In the softening light, it did not look dangerous, it did not even look powerful, it looked small, a relic of a time that believed perfection could protect, that order could replace trust, that harmony could be enforced without cost. The light changed, morning brightness eased into something warmer, slower. A golden hour that touched everything without preference. It slid along the trunks of living trees and lingered just as kindly on bent metal and shattered glass. Nature did not condemn the ruin, it accepted it. What could not be carried forward would be absorbed. What could not grow would fade, the landscape would remember. Not as a warning carved in stone, but as texture, as history folded gently into the present, and if one listened closely, beneath the wind and the distant water, beneath the ordinary sounds of a world continuing, there was a quiet truth settling into place. Perfection was never salvation, it was only a beautiful cage. The light held for a moment longer, and then, without erasing what had been, it grew so bright, that even memory softened into possibility.
The end.